There is a sentence I never thought I'd have to say out loud in America, but here we are. Google wants federal permission to release up to 64 million bacteria infected mosquitoes across California and Florida because apparently search engines and email surveillance and AI, phones that listen to you, cars that track you, and algorithmic censorship were not enough. Now big tech wants wings, and not metaphorical wings, actual wings, buzzing wings, released over American communities, no less, raised in a lab, treated with bacteria, regulated under pesticide law, and sold to the public as another glorious achievement from the same people who never stop telling us, don't worry, we know what we're doing. Sure you do. The Federal Register notice says Google LLC has applied to the EPA for an experimental use permit involving Wolbachia-infected WALB, which is the bacteria that is contained in live adult, and I'm going to butcher this, live adult Culex quinquefasciatus, or male mosquitoes. The proposed release would be in California and Florida over 2 years. 16 million in Florida in year 1, 16 million in Florida in year 2, 16 million in California in year 1, 16 million in California in year 2. That is 64 million mosquitoes, and the public comment period closes just a couple days from the time of this production, June 5th. So if you're just hearing about this, congratulations, you have discovered modern representative government. The experiment is already in the federal docket. The public notice is written in bureaucratic hieroglyphics, and the citizen gets a few days to object before the machine just keeps moving on anyway. Now, the official explanation is very soothing. It's very sterile, very lab coat approved. Don't worry, citizen. These are male mosquitoes. Male mosquitoes, they supposedly do not bite. And they're being released so that they can mate with wild females and the eggs won't hatch. The goal is to reduce disease-carrying mosquito populations. The target species, Culex quinquefasciatus, can carry disease. Clear, nobody is pretending that mosquitoes are cuddly. Mosquitoes are dangerous. Ticks are dangerous. Disease-carrying insects are not a joke. And right now we are seeing a major uptick, no pun intended, although I think that pun walked right into traffic, but an uptick in tick exposure. The CDC has said that emergency room visits for tick bites have been higher than normal in many parts of the country. Lyme disease cases and tick-borne illnesses have become a serious and growing health problem. So yes, the problem is real. But here's the question that nobody in the approved information priesthood we call the media wants to answer. Who gave Google, the Gates crowd, the EPA, or any other unelected scientific industrial cartel the moral authority to conduct open-air biological experiments over communities that never meaningfully consented? That is the issue. Not whether mosquitoes are bad, not whether disease is real, not whether Wolbachia-based mosquito suppression has scientific support. The issue is consent. The issue is liability. The issue is whether the people who live underneath these experiments have any real power to say no. Let's be honest here. A comment box on a federal website is not informed consent. That is not the same thing as a town voting. That is not the same thing as local communities being asked. It's not the same thing as parents, farmers, homeowners, churches, schools, and neighborhoods being told plainly, hey, a corporation wants to release millions of lab-raised insects in your neighborhood. Here's what could go right, here is what could go wrong, and here's who is liable if we are wrong. No, what we get instead is a sterile notice in the Federal Register and a bunch of experts saying, trust the science. Now, I am proudly Gen X. We were raised on garden hoses, lead paint, secondhand smoke, mystery meat at school, and playground equipment made out of rusted steel and a whole bunch of bad decisions. We are not exactly a delicate generation, but somehow even we can recognize that releasing millions of bacteria-infected insects into the environment should require more than a PDF and a deadline. Supporters say the approach is safe. They say male mosquitoes do not bite. They say Wolbachia is naturally occurring. They say this technique can suppress disease-carrying mosquitoes without spraying traditional pesticides everywhere. Well, fine, put that on the table. But critics raise real questions too. What happens if females slip through the sorting process? Because this whole system depends on releasing males only. The female mosquitoes are the ones that bite. The female mosquitoes are the ones that spread disease. So if the sorting process isn't perfect, what then? And anyone who has ever used a self-checkout machine knows the technology is not perfect. Now imagine trusting AI-powered sorting systems and automated mosquito factories to separate millions of fragile insects by sex with flawless precision. What could possibly go wrong? Studies in Wolbachia systems have also discussed issues like imperfect maternal transmission, incomplete incompatibility, temperature stress, and the possibility that environmental conditions can affect outcomes. Plain English, that means the system is not magic. Biology is messy. Nature does not always obey a PowerPoint. Heat matters. Environment matters. Local ecology matters. Wild populations matter. The theory in the lab is one thing. The real world is another. And once millions of mosquitoes are released, there is no practical undo button. You can't recall them like a defective iPhone charger. You can't send out a push notification to warn the swarm. You can't tell the bugs, hey guys, turns out the model was wrong. Why don't you circle back to Mountain View? We'll get this all squared away. This is not software. This is life, and it's real lives. And when we start manipulating living systems at scale over communities that didn't vote for it, that didn't request it, and that may have no practical recourse if something goes wrong, we're not just talking about pest control anymore. We're talking about population manipulation. We're talking about insect and wildlife warfare, and I will coin that phrase right now, wildlife warfare. I know that phrase sounds dramatic. Good, it should. Because what else do you call it when powerful institutions alter disease-carrying creatures and release them into the environment as a control mechanism? Maybe the intention is disease reduction. Maybe the stated goal really is public health. Maybe some of the scientists involved are sincere people trying to solve a real problem, but intentions are not enough. Every nightmare policy of the modern era comes wrapped in good intentions. We're doing this for safety. We're doing this for health. We're doing this for the planet. We're doing this for the children. And then somehow, normal people always end up with fewer rights, less recourse, more surveillance, more risk, and another lecture from people who live behind gated communities. And that brings us to commentator Tom Renz, who recently posted in social media about this. And his point was about liability. If these things bite you or harm you or contribute to some unintended consequence or illness, can you sue anybody? Or does the federal EPA approval become a legal shield? That's not a small concern. We have already seen legal battles over whether federal pesticide approval can preempt state-level lawsuits. In the glyphosate cases, for example, the argument is essentially this. If the EPA approved the label, can state courts still hold a company liable for failure to warn? Now apply that logic then to living mosquito systems regulated under pesticide law. If the federal government approves the release and people later claim they were injured or harmed, what happens? Does the company say, well, sorry, the EPA signed off? Or will the agency say, hey, we followed the process? Do you and me, the citizens, get told you can't prove causation? Because that's the oldest trick in the institutional playbook. First, they tell you there is no risk. And then if something happens, they tell you there's no evidence. And then if the evidence appears, they tell you it's statistically rare. And then if enough people are hurt, they tell you it's too late to assign blame. And finally, they tell you to move on for the good of society. No, thank you. Now, let's widen the lens because this is not just about Google. The Gates Foundation has funded mosquito-related research for years, including research that literally explored the concept of using mosquitoes as, quote, flying syringes, unquote, to deliver vaccine proteins through bites. A flying syringe. That phrase should have ended the meeting right there. That phrase should have caused every normal person in that room to stand up and say, I'm sorry, did you just suggest turning a disease-carrying insect into an involuntary medical delivery device? Because here's the question then that never goes away with that. Dosage, right? If a nurse gives you an injection, the dose is measured. Your identity is known, your medical history can be considered. Your consent is supposed to matter. But if a mosquito bites you, well, how many times did it bite you? How many mosquitoes bit you? What if it bites a child? What if it bites a pregnant woman? What if it bites an elderly person? What if it bites someone with autoimmune issues? What if it bites someone who can never consent at all? And before the, well, actually, crowd starts stretching their typing fingers, Google's current mosquito proposal is not the same thing as a mosquito vaccine delivery project. I understand that. Google's current proposal is about bacteria-infected male mosquitoes intended to suppress reproduction. The Gates-funded flying syringe concept was research. But that's exactly the point. The line just keeps moving. Yesterday it was research. Today it's trials. Tomorrow it's public health infrastructure. And the day after that, well, it's mandatory because the experts decided that your backyard was part of the experiment. And if you ask too many questions, they treat you like a criminal. That's the part I think that at least makes my hair stand up on end. If you or I say the wrong thing online, if we think the wrong thought, we post the wrong meme, we question the wrong election or criticize the wrong agency, or refuse to bend the knee to the right political idol, suddenly the full machinery of the state power can wake up. Bank accounts, investigations, labels, watch lists, subpoenas, deplatforming, debanking. But if a credentialed technocrat wants to release modified insects into the environment, well, suddenly it's innovation. Suddenly it's progress. Suddenly we all are supposed to applaud because the wizards of smart have blessed us with another gift. Same class of people that could not tell you where COVID came from without checking which answer was allowed that week now wants to use a trust fall experiment on us over engineered bug programs. No, absolutely not. Now, I do need to bring up Lyme disease here. I know we're talking about the pattern recognition, wildlife warfare. What about Lyme disease? I know many people believe Lyme came from a lab experimentation or military research involving ticks. I happen to hold that view. And that suspicion exists because the government has an ugly history of biological experimentation and because secrecy breeds suspicion. See, when institutions lie for long enough, people stop assuming innocence. But on balance, I will be careful because we really can't say we know Lyme disease was created in a lab. And even the strongest evidence I've seen won't prove that. Of course, we'll never be able to actually prove that. Genetic research, though, has suggested the Lyme bacterium was circulating in North America before modern U.S. labs existed, but that doesn't mean those labs didn't get that bacterium and do some experimenting of their own. But I digress. I think here's the more defensible point on that, and it's still damning. We know that ticks carry devastating disease. We know that mosquitoes carry devastating disease. We know that governments have studied biological agents. We know private foundations and tech companies are investing in insect manipulation. We know that public consent is weak. We know legal recourse may be limited. And we know that people asking for trust have not earned it. That is not a conspiracy. Okay, we recognize the pattern. And here's the biblical principle, all right? God's creation is not a toy. Genesis says God gave man dominion over the earth. Dominion does not mean reckless domination. Dominion does not mean playing sorcerer with ecosystems that you barely understand. Dominion means stewardship under God. It means humility. It means accountability. It means you do not unleash living systems into communities and then hide behind a federal agency if the consequences show up 5 years later. The book of Proverbs says there is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. And I think that verse should be engraved over the front door of at least half the agencies in Washington, not because I'm trying to dictate Christianity, but because every one of these experiments is sold the same way: safety, progress, compassion, the greater good. But the greater good has become the favorite hiding place of people who want power without permission. So no, I'm not saying every mosquito project is a bioweapon, but I am saying the public has every reason to fear what I'm calling insect and wildlife warfare. When private tech giants, global foundations, and federal agencies start manipulating disease-carrying creatures at scale, while ordinary people have no meaningful consent and may have limited legal recourse if the experts are wrong. And the experts are wrong a lot. The question is not, I say again, whether mosquitoes are dangerous. The question is whether the people trying to redesign nature are more dangerous. Because mosquitoes can bite your arm, but unchecked power bites civilization. And if we do not draw a line now on consent, on liability, transparency, local control, human dignity, then one day your government will tell you that the swarm over your head is perfectly safe, that the corporation behind it is fully protected, the science is settled, and your injury is statistically insignificant. At that point, you will not be a citizen. You'll be a test subject. And the only thing buzzing louder than the mosquitoes will be the sound of every institution pretending nobody could have possibly seen it coming. Well, what do you think? Leave us your thoughts in the comments. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Remember, you can find full episodes of Culture Crossroads at becktv.plus, bektv.plus, every Sunday at 5 p.m. Central Time. And as always, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.